It's golden hour. Whoa. Hey, welcome to the dock. Long time no see this place, right? I am currently in New York, Long Island. That is where I am from. For those of you who have been around for a long time or seen my older videos, you know this is where I started my YouTube channel. I've been staying here for about a month now with my mom. You guys have seen my uploads have been kind of shoddy lately, and it's because I'm going through some stuff and I'm out here to get grounded. Can you hear how loud these birds are also? I'll have lots to share with you guys about all of this experience in the future when I'm not actively going through the stuff that I'm going through, but I just want you guys to know I'm so grateful that you're here. Did some painting this week and I figured I would talk about, you already saw it from the title, talk about oils and acrylics. For those of you who are maybe kind of new to painting and haven't experimented with different mediums, thought I'd give you guys some insight, what the benefits are to each of them and how they function differently and how you can incorporate them yourself, how I use both. Okay, now let's look at these birds. Welcome to the voiceover. Today I thought I would talk about some of the differences between acrylics and oils for those of you who maybe don't have much of a scope of understanding for why people use them differently and how they function differently, how you could use them together in the same painting. So let's dive right into that. In the 3 paintings I'm going to be making while I talk, I'm going to be doing an acrylic underpainting followed by a top layer of oil. My reason for doing this has to do with the basic differences between the two of them. With acrylic, for instance, you can build up layers very quickly because the acrylic paint is water-based. Because it's water-based, it dries very quickly. So if I want to get down some good visual history and really build up a lot of layers, I'm going to go in first with my acrylic. Because when you're working with oils, generally you have to let each layer dry in between working with them, unless you're doing a wet into wet technique. But for me, if I want to have a very opaque background and then work on top of it with a more translucent paint like oil paints, then I can very quickly develop my layers with that acrylic in one setting, and when I'm ready to just finish it off, I can do a final layer with oil on the very top. Now, because acrylics dry so quickly, you do have to work much quicker with your brush. This means that as you mix up your paints and you want to apply them, you're going to be moving the paint more quickly from your palette to your painting surface. If you want to do any blending, you're also going to have to work much quicker with your brush. There are different products you can use to slow the drying time of acrylics, an acrylic retarder, so that is one option. But generally for me, my blending is much less seamless when I'm working with acrylics than it is when I'm working with oils, though I can get some pretty decently smooth gradients with acrylics at times. A lot of the times when I'm working with acrylics though, I do like using quick, short brush movements and doing something that looks a bit more impressionistic and less photorealistic like I might do with oil paints. After I've developed a really solid base layer with my acrylics, then often I like to move on to oil paints. Now, something to know about oils is that instead of being hydrophilic like acrylics are, meaning that they love water, oils are hydrophobic, which means that they repel water. So if you think about any time that you've mixed oil with water and you can see how the oil separates from it, that's a general basis for what I mean by saying that oil paints are hydrophobic. Because oil paints are hydrophobic, you have to use other substances to dilute your paint. If you want to get the paint more drawn out and thin, you're not going to mix in water, you're going to mix in something like a medium. Now there's tons of different mediums you can use. I will say my favorite one is liquid. The other thing that means is when you are washing your paintbrushes, whereas with acrylic you can just stamp it out with water. With oil paints you're going to have to use something like odorless mineral spirits, which is a paint thinner, or some kind of soap, or even hair shampoo. Now the other part of oil paints being hydrophobic means that they dry much slower. Now this of course has benefits and drawbacks just depending on what you want to accomplish with your painting. Like I was saying before, perhaps if you did want to do an oil painting and you need to develop layers of it and you want to do it in a timely, quick manner, then that could be a drawback for you. But on the plus side, if you do want to do something like develop a very smooth color transition, do a gradient, do just something that's very blurred and soft, then oils are fantastic for this because you don't have to work very quickly and you can continue to move your colors around, go over the surface, and just finalize that smoothing of my gradients. Oil paints are a little bit tricky to work with in the beginning. It's hard for people getting used to the idea that they do dry so slowly and that they have a different texture than the acrylics do. Oils also tend to give you just this beautiful kind of color, a sheen that you don't necessarily get as easily with your acrylics. The very first time I ever worked with oil paints, I remember not having any idea that I had done this, but I got blue paint on my hands and I had transferred it onto my face, and by the end of class I literally just had my entire face covered with oils. That's another thing to get really used to with oils. Because they're not drying quickly, that means that they will stay wet on different surfaces like your hands or your arms or your clothes for a long time, and transference of that paint gets very easy and extremely messy if you're not being careful. I can't tell you how many times I've leaned my hand into my oil paints on my palette and then transferred it onto my painting or onto my clothes and had to just spend time scrubbing things away. Beyond doing just these paintings where I have an acrylic underpainting and an oil over the top, I do like using each of these paints independently, and I think there is definitely value in that. With oil paints, if you're just going to do an entirely oil-based painting, you just have to be aware that you're going to have more time needed in between each layer to dry, and how long that timing is really just depends on a couple things. Number one, how thick is the paint that you're laying down? And number two, are you mixing in anything like a medium that might speed up your drying time? For me, I do extremely thin layers of paint, and I also do use liquid as my medium, and because of this, one of my layers of paint will likely dry overnight and be ready for me to work on it the next day. But like I said, if you are working thicker, that will probably take longer. How you want to work with either of these paints is completely up to you. In the end, it really just comes down to what your personal preference is. I do think there's value in both. If you guys have any questions, I hope that you guys will leave them in the comments. Anything that I do not get to myself, I love the community support. So if anyone has anything to offer in terms of answers, please feel free to start discussions in the comments. And now I will pass it back off to Real Life Robin. I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I hope you have the best week ahead of you. If any of you guys are likewise going through some stuff, make sure you find some people who just have your best interest in mind and can keep you grounded. You are worthy of love. Things get better. I'm rooting for you. Okay. Bye.